Welcome to Mum Abroad's YouTube channel, where I'm joined today by Laurent Baldoni. He was born in France, raised in the UK, and has been living in Spain for the past 20 years. He worked for nearly 20 years in the film business, making mainly commercials all over the world, before deciding to jump off the corporate wheel and follow his passion, helping others to achieve balance and well-being in their lives. Hi, Laurent.
Hi, Jane.
Thank you for joining me today. That's a huge career change. How easy a decision was it to make that change?
So it's a good question. There's a couple of parts to that question. I think in terms of understanding the decision and knowing it was the right decision, that part is easy. I think when you know yourself and you understand what makes you happy, then you know which path you need to follow. Now, the actual implementation of that decision, having the courage to park a successful career and something that you've done your entire adult life, and to have the courage to look at and then go down another path, that bit is hard, because we all have an element of fear. What if it doesn't work? So in that respect, that was hard, and it took a little bit of time to actually, as you're doing the studies and you're realizing that this is something that you're very passionate about and that you really enjoy and that makes you happy, and that also is just a different life in terms of the amount of time you need to put in. Film world is 18 hours a day quite often. Therapy is not. So there's a whole sort of a whole sequence of things, elements sort of linked to that, which are put in place. But once you do it, in my case, it was that. But for anyone looking to make an important decision in terms of changing their lives and maybe embracing a more authentic life, the benefits when you get out the other side are tremendous.
Why do you think it is, Laurent, that we do lose focus of who we really are? And how easy do you think it is to find our authentic self, like you just said?
Again, that's a great question, and there are a couple of elements to that. I think, again, finding your authentic self is easy in theory if you listen to yourself, because it's all inside. We know what's good for us. We know the things that are beneficial to us, but quite often when we hear that voice, we go, shh. And what we need to do is listen to ourselves, because we are telling ourselves, who our authentic self is and what makes us happy. But once again, actually listening to that and implementing that is a little bit tricky. And as to why that is, I think there's a lot of background noise. Especially these days with social media everywhere. There's a lot of influence. I mean, literally influencers. It's in the name. People who are paid on social media to influence how we think, what we believe, what we wear, and even politically, if you want to go down that channel, generally what's okay and what's not okay. What is beauty these days? I mean, that's a whole Pandora's box just there. Youth now, now it's impossible to age gracefully. There's all these questions and pressures that are put on people from the outside. So it's easy to understand how we get lost, because there's so much pressure from the outside. And I think it comes down to trying to block out as best we can the background noise, and to really listen to what's going on in here and what we really want and what is really beneficial to us genuinely. And that's tricky. That's tricky these days.
You mentioned social media, so I'd like to kind of talk a little bit more about that. Not just about the whole image to do with social media, but also about this kind of crazy, hectic lives that we all seem to be living at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
I feel personally that this is amplified by the availability of literally everything that's online. And that has a really positive aspect, you're, being able to connect with people that you wouldn't perhaps ordinarily be able to connect with socially and for business. But then you also have the negative side of it. Often feel incredibly overwhelmed by the amount of information that's being thrown at me on all different social media platforms. And I do occasionally think, I'm going to cut myself off from this completely. But then I think, but how do I do that? My life is so entwined in it. And I know that you made a conscious decision not to have social media in your life. How difficult is that? Or maybe how easy is that?
So that's a really complex question. I'll come back to why I haven't done it, but it's a really fascinating question in general. And you've kind of answered it within the question. You said, I sometimes feel overwhelmed. And I think that's the issue. And it's not about black and white thinking. It's not about all social media is awful and, and let's, not do anything. I mean, that's obviously up to the individual. But what I will say is what you said there about connectivity. I'm not sure if it is anymore about connectivity. That was the idea, and that's where it was born out of, the idea that we can connect. But I think we're more isolated than ever. We're constantly on our devices. We're constantly talking to people here. There's no more contact. People don't phone each other anymore. We don't hear our voices. And we pay so much attention to what's written on a Twitter account or an Instagram post or something like that, that actually I think it's kind of gone the other way. And I'm not sure how much that connectivity is still there. And if it is, it's about understanding to which degree we can let social media into our lives and to which degree it's healthy and useful and positive, which undoubtedly it is for some people, and to what degree it's incredibly unhelpful, dysfunctional, dangerous to other people. And you look at, a lot of studies that have gone into teen, tween, young adult depression and anxiety over the last 10 years or so, even suicide rates among those young, I'm talking teens and tweens, very young people that are obviously massively influenced and that don't maybe have the emotional intelligence to understand that some of this stuff isn't helpful to them. And it's that kind of blindly following societal norms and pressures. Oh, well, everyone has Instagram, so you have it. Now, I was always someone, even at school, who questioned everything, which I chuckle because at the time I was told I was difficult or annoying, by teachers. But I was always very curious, and I always wanted to understand why we do stuff and why things exist. And challenging that, I think, is really beneficial, certainly in a therapeutic environment. But in general, so social media exists. Great. What are we actually getting out of it as individuals? Because it's not about what the world gets out of it. We're all different. We all react differently to these things. So I think it is important to at least ask the question of social media: what benefit does it have, and what does it bring me? What does it take away? I think is a healthy sort of way of looking at that. Now, personally, I was never really interested in it. I had a Facebook account, which is probably still out there, but I haven't looked at it in years. I never had anything else because I even found myself someone who quite clearly doesn't care about a like or a this or a that. I suddenly found myself caring about a like or a post or something. And I could feel something going on inside, which I just didn't like. And it was taking me down a path which I just felt I was no longer the one choosing. And of course, it's set up that way. The dopamine hit. This is the society we live in. We need instant gratification. We need a like. We need someone to say something about something we've just said. And that's a slightly dangerous sort of dynamic. And I spotted it quite early and just decided, well, that's it for me. And in terms of how easy it was, pretty easy actually, but perhaps I'm different to most people in that sense. I haven't given that a lot of thought, but because I knew, I was able to differentiate the benefit for me over what it was sort of taking away in terms of my time and my energy and my thoughts. And going back to what we said at the beginning, getting in touch with your authentic self, I know that I don't actually care, so why was I caring? I could have that conversation with myself and realize that if I didn't have Facebook in my life, I was actually okay, and not just okay, but I was better and happier, because those sort of triggers weren't there. Professionally, it's a different conversation. But even as a producer, I never had a website. I didn't like to have a CV. It was just, I like the slightly old-fashioned meeting people face to face, and that's the same with the crew that I hired. I didn't look at their CV. I met them over a coffee, and within 5 minutes I would know if I wanted to work with that person. And it's the same with therapy. Why do I offer a free introductory session, 20-30 minutes? They can see me on Zoom or whatever, and at least they get to see my face, and they can see if they feel the trust and the rapport and the connection needed for it to work. So, that real life, quote unquote, to me has always been far more interesting than any kind of online sort of relationship. So personally, that was easy. Professionally, do you reach fewer people if you don't have Instagram? Possibly, but I can't be fake. I can't pretend like I'm into that. I can't pretend and put posts up and photos and quotes or whatever if that's not who I am. And I don't want to pretend to be something I'm not. It's very important to me that the people who do come to me see me exactly as I am, who I am. And then if they connect, wonderful. And as a caveat, if they don't, that's fine. And I wish them all the best somewhere else. But I don't want to project an image that isn't true. And I guess one final point on that is there's so much misinformation on social media. There are so many lies, so many untruths that are sold as truths, especially in the wellness industry, which is something that, for me is incredibly sad to see how it's become a business and not, we've lost sight a little bit about of genuinely caring for the other person, which in a therapeutic sense is the only thing that matters. What is beneficial to my client, not my agenda, not my opinion. It's what's beneficial to them. And I think that's been lost now with social media, money, business, etc. So I guess for all of the above, I steer clear.
I think it's social media is like going down a rabbit hole, isn't it? And you just get completely lost. And I think this conversation that we're having now can also put ourselves down a rabbit hole and get lost, because there's just so much to talk about. There's so much that's relevant. I'm not going to do that now. That will be for another day. What I wanted to say to you was that on your website, you say that this is a real passion for you. It's not a job about helping people. So where do you think that passion for helping others stems from?
That's another very good question. And again, there's a couple of parts to it. The first thing I think is important to clarify, it would be misleading for me to say that since the age of 5, I knew I was going to be a therapist and that's all I ever dreamt of. So in terms of when I think I say it's a passion, not a job, that discovery happened when I started studying it seriously. So when I did my first couple of courses, psychology, holistic psychology, and then actually the magic moment was when I became a bit more specific and I did a couple of counseling courses and CBT courses, which had practical experience within them. And that the first time I went in a room, as it were, with someone, even though at the time they were volunteers or fellow students, you would practice on each other. That's when there was a moment of, wow, this is it. Because the theoretical aspect, while really important, it didn't give me the joy that working with someone did. And very, very quickly, immediately, I felt a connection, and I felt that moment of passion, of genuine passion. And that's when I knew. That's when I knew that was what I was going to do. That's when I knew that I could change careers. That's when I knew that I had the capacity as well, because it's very important to know that you can bring something to someone. It might be your dream, it might be your passion, but if you're no good and you're not helping people, you're not able to guide people and be supportive and give the client what they need, then there's no point in continuing. I wanted to be a footballer when I was a kid, but I wasn't good enough. So that dream couldn't exist. So that moment of being in the room, getting positive feedback and very positive feedback, and people who were grateful, fellow students, for the work that we had together, and just feeling that genuine connection with that part of the process, the real part of the process, that's when I could say this is a passion. And as it's my job, I can now say it's not a job, it's a passion. I genuinely enjoy what I do, and that challenge of seeking out with each different person what it is that's going to be beneficial to them, because obviously they're all different. Everybody's different, and they're different on different days. So each time you're kind of reevaluating which direction to go in for their benefit. So that was, that part was, during the studies. But if you go further, I was always curious. I mentioned it before. I was always curious as to why life is the way it is, why the human condition, why we are the way we are, why that person's like that. I was always really curious. And I was curious to understand myself as well. And I did my therapeutic process many years ago, and it was very beneficial. And so there was always a part of me that wanted to understand people, that liked talking to people, that liked philosophizing, that liked having existentialist chats over a cup of tea or a beer or whatever it was. That was always there, but never in a month of Sundays when I was younger did I think that would lead to a career in as a therapist. That came in adult life, looking for something else, and having a lot of people saying to me, you should look at that, because you're helping us, friends, families, even people I didn't know that I'd meet over dinner and just chat to for an hour or two. When that started happening, I thought maybe there's something there in terms of something more official. So I guess a general curiosity always. The passion came through the studying, and thankfully it's still that day. I do sometimes say to people, I wonder if that moment will arrive when you stop feeling that, but no, it's still there.
You practice something called integrative therapy. Can you explain a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, so integrative therapy in the simplest terms just means that you're drawing on a few different therapeutic approaches. So rather than being specifically a CBT practitioner or whatever it might be, I don't label myself a psychoanalyst. I do draw on psychoanalysis, traditional psychology, psychodynamics. I also draw on CBT, as it happens, counseling, holistic psychology. They would be the kind of areas of study that I focus on. But I have studied Gestalt and mindfulness and many other things. Now, it's really important to say that this isn't like a mishmash, a sort of jumbled, random hodgepodge of ideas that you sort of throw at a client and see what sticks. It is very flexible. So it opens the door to many different clients, which as a therapist, I find fascinating and challenging in a wonderful way. But more to the point, it's the benefit to the client. And that is, clients are humans. They wake up in a good mood, in a bad mood. Different things happen to them on different weeks. They've got a whole load of things that they're dealing with, family life, professional life. So they're never the same on different days. And that flexibility, what it does is, if you spend some time maybe in a more traditional psychodynamic way for a few sessions, looking at childhood, looking at trauma and how that's influenced the present day, they might come one day and you can just sense that they're tired, they've had a bad week, and they don't want to dig into that. So maybe a kind of modern day pragmatic CBT type exercise for that session would be of benefit to them. And that's what it always comes down to. What is the benefit to the client? So what it allows is a little bit of flexibility in terms of your approach, but it's really clear that it's not random. It's something that in the first session or two, you're kind of getting an idea of where this client is at, and obviously putting yourself into their shoes, understanding things from their perspective, getting into their frame of reference. And once you see the world from their point of view, then you start to understand which tools, which exercises are going to be of most benefit to them. And so the integrative approach just allows you to have a few more tools on your tool belt, as it were, when approaching each client.
So obviously, Laurent, as you were saying, that each client comes to you with a different story and a different need, and you have these different therapies kind of in your toolbox. But can you literally use a combination of therapies for one person? Does it work like that?
It doesn't. No, it doesn't work like that in a general sense, and it's impossible to generalize because everybody's different. So there are no rules within integrative therapy in terms of you couple together some therapies. It's whatever the client is presenting, whatever the client needs, certainly as best you see it, applying that. The other thing that's important is I don't really tend to label what we're doing quite so much. So in terms of an interview like this, you might talk about, being a CBT practitioner, working with psychodynamic theory. You might talk about holistic psychology. You might talk about counseling. But in the room, I'm not saying right now we're going to do some CBT and now we're going to do, I'll be asking questions, and some of those questions perhaps might draw on psychodynamics, and then some of them might come from another approach. But it's a seamless, let's say, process if it's happening within a session. Obviously, different sessions, I might finish a session and go, well, next time I think I'm going to maybe do this because that's what I think might be beneficial. But even then, you're open to what the client brings. But what's really important is we're not labeling this, saying, we're jumping from here to here. You yourself know that you, as the therapist, that you're drawing on different psychological theories, but within that hour, within that space, you wouldn't necessarily know that different approaches are being used. It's a session, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does completely. So how important is it to have a holistic approach to therapy, do you think?
Another good question. I think the short answer is very important. The short answer is holistic in the sense of the Greek, the whole person. It's been slightly reappropriated, that word, to sort of mean alternative approaches and theories. But in terms of the whole person, I think it's incredibly important to look at everything. Quite often a client will be talking about certain symptoms, but they're not the root cause. They're a symptom. The classic is let's say insomnia, right? A lot of people might struggle to sleep and they say, well, this is my issue. But obviously insomnia isn't the root cause. We're not sleeping because something else is going on within us, whether it's here or there's something emotionally, there's something either from the past, there's something we might have suppressed, or there's something that we're very conscious about, but it's that that's causing that symptom. So looking at the whole person, I think, is really important, and making sure that everything is in balance. I mean, we talk a lot about sort of the emotional and the rational in therapy, but the physical, in all senses of the word, what we ingest, what we put into our bodies, is hugely influential. I mean, think about serotonin. Most of it is generated in the gut. Serotonin being, the mood controller in humans. What controls our general sense of happiness, our mood. So it stands to reason that looking after that area influences our mood. So it's not always, again, I don't like to generalize. It's not, you can't generalize and say that an approach works for everyone, but certainly it's important with most people to look at, is their life in balance from a physical sense? What are they eating? What are they drinking? What are they ingesting? Is there medication? Anything that goes into the body, on top of the emotional symptoms, mental symptoms that are presenting, but also vocational, volitional. So obviously the job, how many people are burnt out these days? How many people are stressed out? How many people are finding time for themselves every day? What are you doing every day that you want to do? And I understand there's family, and I understand we have partners and family units and a responsibility, and we have to earn money and put food on the table. But within that, how much are each of us doing every day just for us? So all those aspects are incredibly important. And the interesting thing about that holistic approach is that quite often it's what we resist the most, because we talked about it earlier, the dopamine hit, the instant gratification, things like eating a little bit better. And we're not talking about never having a burger or never having a drink. There's no black and white thinking here. It's not extreme, it's not rigid, and it's not intransigent. It's just generally, on the whole, are you doing the best you can to look after yourself in every sense of the word? Each of those aspects, the mental aspect, the emotional aspect, the physical aspect, the volitional aspect, the spiritual aspect, not just in a religious sense, if those parts of ourselves can be in balance, there will be a benefit to the emotional and the mental side, which is what most people tend to focus on.
So from your own experience, from your career changing and all of the studies that you've done, what would you say is the key to a happy and balanced life? Have you found it?
Have I found it? I can honestly say, that I can look in the mirror and say that I'm happy and at peace. Now, that doesn't mean that that's every day. And that's something we talk a lot about with clients. There are triggers everywhere. There are situations that spring up. Life surprises you. There are people who aren't nice in the world. There are things everywhere that can bring about, unpleasant thoughts, unpleasant emotions, and lead to unwanted behaviors. But in a general sense, if each of us can get to a point where we understand ourselves, that's the key thing, understanding ourselves well enough to know what to do in these moments to help balance reactivity, excessive emotional responses to things that perhaps lead us into behaviors that are, not beneficial to us or to those that we care for, those around us. Then you're in a pretty good spot. And I think self-awareness is one of the most important things on that journey. Being able to look inside and to look in the mirror and say, yes, I am flawed. To stop looking outside and pointing fingers and blaming people, whether it's parents, school, society, politicians, etc., and understanding that everything you feel is a choice. We have a choice in how we feel. We have a choice in improving our thoughts and therefore our feelings and behaviors, taking responsibility for ourselves, looking inside rather than outside for that balance, for that authenticity, for that happiness. If you can do that, I think you're in a really good spot, because also that brings about validation from inside. And that ties in a little bit with social media and how we're so obsessed with what other people think about us and whether they've liked a post. There are so many external conditions of worth in people's lives in terms of getting validation and approval and acknowledgement from outside things. And I want to be clear, nothing wrong with getting a pat on the back from your boss because you've done a great job. But if that's your priority, if that's how you get self-esteem, it's probably going to lead to certain behaviors that are less beneficial to you and your family unit. If a work pat on the back is top of the podium for you. So looking inside, authenticity, self-awareness, listening to yourself.
We really have to stop comparing ourselves with other people, don't we, with what's going on around us, which is all part of the social media thing that you've been talking about.
100%. Loving ourselves. Loving ourselves, understanding ourselves, and understanding that self-worth, as the name suggests, it's self-worth. It's not somebody else's worth. It's not the fact that such and such likes you and obviously it's wonderful when your partner and you're in love and your kids look at you with that look of sheer pure love. and getting a pat on the back and, you know, doing a great job, and or a client showing their appreciation. Of course, that's great. These are all wonderful things. But if you have all of those things from a base, a foundation, a stable foundation where you're okay with yourself, very important to say that's not arrogance. That's not saying, hey, I'm the best. That's I'm okay with who I am, with my flaws, with the whole of me, going back to the holistic sort of question, then everything else kind of matters a little bit less. And while it's nice to get approval, it's not the be all and end all. And in the same way, when someone is judgmental and critical of you in an unhelpful way, it'll affect you less. You know, it's about slightly being less influenced by those external conditions of worth.
I would say from a personal point of view, I think it gets easier as you get older. I don't know if that's the same for everybody, but for me,
Definitely, 100%,
to
100%,
let it go, what other people think, you know,
100%.
of you, or not worry about other people's
100%. But that's why there's so many people who, you know, I think back to my own journey as well. You know, when you're in your, I guess, mid-30s into 40s, everyone's starting to look a little bit more in more detail at their lives, at who they are, and they, you know, you have that moment where, you know, you're questioning a lot of that conditioning, everything that's come before. Do I own that? Is that belief, are these rules that I'm living life by, are they mine? Or have they been imposed on me by something, by someone? And can I challenge those beliefs? What are my beliefs? Can I be the driver in my life, not the passenger? And I you know, I think of my clients, I have a huge amount in that age bracket. Not to say all of them, pretty much in that sort of age bracket, that are getting to that point where it's like, now I need to let go of everything that comes before and start a new, more honest path, more authentic path, and be happy, you know. And that's looping back into the passion. That's the, you know, the magical, beautiful aspect, the powerful aspect of this job is being a part of that journey with people and seeing people who are looking over the precipice and empowering them to understand that they are the solution. They are the solution, not anything out there. They are the solution, and seeing them progress is, you know, it's magical. It's lovely.
finding that inner confidence.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, it's been a real pleasure talking to you today, Laurent. Thank you very much for joining me. I'm going to put along the bottom here your website address. That's baldonitherapy.com. And if anybody would like to find out more about the therapy that you offer and your services, or indeed to find out your contact details, they can take a look there. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Jane. It was a pleasure. Thank you.